So welcome everyone to Jocelyn's growing group. I am seeing a lot of returning faces, which is awesome. And then of course, we've got a lot of new signups as well. So for those of you who are new, there's a quick agenda here so you can get a lay of the land. We like to do a brief intro, and we give people an opportunity to say hello and perhaps mention a growing challenge that they're working on. And of course, this week, we'll follow up on the homework from last week, which hopefully you do recall was around this idea that we want to try and reuse materials as much as possible. Here at Waste Not Farms, we're a zero waste business. We're in the business of keeping waste out of landfill. So we're always looking to repurpose materials first before we buy any. So the homework from last week had been, while you go about your business, look for items that could be repurposed to work in your pots or your containers or your backyard or your growing space, whatever it is. So I'm eager to hear if anybody was successful with that. Of course, we'll then get into the content. Today, we're talking about the regenerative principles, and I'm really excited to finally be introducing those in full force. And as always, we do have a special discount promo for those of you who've been able to make it today, and the Q&A opportunity. So if you do have questions, you can throw them in the chat. Kat, my colleague, is monitoring the chat. She will be able to answer some questions. So sometimes you can get an immediate answer from her. And otherwise, then I'll be answering the questions in order at the end of near the end of the session. So the earlier you get the question in, the greater chance it will get answered today. So I'm going to move ahead to our facilitated intros. And in this case, what we do is we ask that you take about 30 seconds or less, give us your name, what particular growing challenge you want to work on this year. And if you were here last week, you can, I'm eager to hear if you're able to find any nifty items around your home there that might be able to work in your garden to create additional growing space. So with that in mind, I do want to open the floor to anybody that would like to raise their hand. So in order to do that and introduce yourself, you're going to look at the bottom of your screen and there'll be a little smiley face emoji. And if you hover over that or click on that, there will be a hand raising option, which then shows me that you would like to introduce yourself. So a quick reminder, we have some folks hopping on right now that I do ask that your mic remains mute unless you are going to introduce yourself or ask a question or called on. And it's up to you whether you want your video on. You're welcome to, but certainly it's not required. So first up, would anybody like to introduce themselves or their growing challenge, or is anyone excited to share a found object that they're keen to try and use in their growing space this year?
So I see Heather has her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, I'm not seeing that, so that's great. So Heather, you can unmute your mic, and please go ahead. Have we got Heather coming online? I can't. I'm not. Oh, there she is. Okay, yep. And
I had to say okay to being recorded before it would let me unmute.
That's great. That's great. How's it going?
It goes okay. I'm feeling a little under the weather today, so I was actually going to watch this from bed, but I'll try to be as interactive as I can briefly. My name is Heather. I live in downtown Toronto, and I'm one of the founding members of a small, well, we call it a community garden. It's actually on private property, but it's open to anybody who wants to join us, called the Laneway Garden Project, also known as Gitagan, which is the Anishinaabe name for gardening. And we have raised beds. We have a fedge, or a fruiting hedge, which is a mini food forest.
Cool.
And we have a lot of, we're heavily into perennial vegetables. So, and indigenous plants and native pollinators. So lots of things on the go. I wasn't here last week, but I can add that we ran around this week collecting plastic containers to use as winter sewing devices. So we've got like 2-liter pop bottles, some vinegar containers and things, and they're all currently sitting on my dining room table because I don't know about where the rest of you are, but it is currently ridiculously warm here. So winter sewing doesn't seem like a good idea for the next few days.
Well, we do know that the weather is throwing us a lot of curveballs, so and it appears it is going to continue to do so. So that's great. Thank you, Heather, for starting us off, and really interesting to hear what you're doing there. We have a number of folks joining us from community gardens, which is just fabulous because it's such a great way to not only get to grow but you're connecting with your community, you're greening your local neighborhood. So many benefits there. And love that you're focused on keeping roots in the ground. So that's one of our regenerative principles with perennials. We'll be touching on that. And the plastic containers, of course, is a great upcycle as well. So awesome. Thank you, Heather. Is there anyone else that would like to hop on and speak briefly? Annette, I see your hand, and then we'll follow with Wally. So Annette, why don't you go ahead and put yourself off mute and take 30 seconds to say hello.
Sure. Hello, everybody. So what I have done for the past week is, first of all, I saw there was a special on grow lights on Amazon. So I got a couple of those. And also I have been collecting plastic containers similar to Heather. You know, when you have those when you buy the salad containers, the long rectangular ones, those ones, or even the berries and stuff like that. I have a collection growing, so that'll be my mini greenhouses.
That is fabulous. Thank you, Annette. And you know, I'm happy to hear I'm among fellow garbage pickers. I actually do have a professional degree in garbage. My mom is attending here and is forever proud of that. So I'm glad I'm not the only one here that's pulling stuff off the curb. Wally, why don't you share for a moment?
Yeah, hi, my name is Wally. I'm going to skip to the homework completed and some of the things that I picked up around the house and yard for this year. And I always find it's never enough. But I've got wood chips, leaves, cardboard, compost on the go. And I've got hay that we had used for Halloween last year as some of the items that I picked up. So hopefully
Nice.
blend them into, yeah.
We're getting all the high carbon material there. So I love that. And I love that you're getting a good diversity as well. So you're not just finding one thing and sticking to it. So again, as we cover the regenerative principles today, that's going to really become clear why that's so key and important. So thank you, Wally. And I do have to acknowledge all our folks that are willing to speak up today. I do know that Annette won the giveaway the other week, and Wally was kind enough to take us up on the promo offer as well. So I do believe, Heather, that leaves you to win the bag of worm manure this week. So thank you for starting us off, and also thank you for your work in the community and for upcycling all those containers. So great start, everyone. And Heather, please direct message your address to Kat, the moderator. She will be able to get that out to you. So let's get going here. A quick recap for those of you who are joining us for the first time. In the past 2 sessions, what we have done is really laid out the groundwork, so to speak, to see what our growing space already offers. and in particular trying to evaluate where we have opportunities for existing microclimates already, or potentially the opportunity to create a microclimate. And so in doing that, we were looking at things like drainage. Where does the water flow? What parts are higher or lower? If you're on a balcony, then you have high elevation at all times. Things are going to dry out faster. Of course, if you're in a gully, that influences not only is water going to pool, cool air will pool, sunlight's reduced. So it's really about assessing what you're working with to start, and then from there building. And you'll see that is a common theme with regenerative growing, that I really got to tuck these ear pods and jam them in, and that we want to build on what Mother Nature's offering us. We really want to work together with her rather than against her, because that's how we're going to get the maximum return with minimal input or energy. So in particular, we were looking at how you can create a warmer microclimate. And again, there's lots of ways to do that. A lot of them revolve around capturing solar radiation heat energy in a wall or in patios in some kind of a mass. Basically, you're capturing thermal mass and then allowing that to dissipate in the cooler evening to your plants or your containers. And for a cool microclimate, we're looking at things like adding additional shade, interplanting so that larger plants are shading out smaller plants, and also adjusting based on watering and mulching needs as well. We also look at indoor ways to adjust microclimates where there's not as many options, but there certainly are opportunities and existing places in your home that will be warmer or colder. An obvious one, of course, is that in your bathroom, there's going to be a lot more humidity, which is great for tropical plants and the like. So that really takes us to where we are at this point. And a note there is that we have had a number of requests for the recording, and we are working to get these sessions up on our website so that they are available after the fact. And we are hoping to have that completed in time for our newsletter send out, which goes out Saturday morning. So make sure you sign up if you're not already for our newsletter to be able to access the recording. So we've already reviewed the homework, so we won't take too much time here. We already heard about supplies that people are commandeering. And I thought it was interesting as well that Annette had found the special on the grow lights. Perhaps, Annette, if you haven't already, you could put that link into the chat. If it is still on sale, others may also want to take advantage. My hope is that as we continue and grow together, that we will be able to share more resources like this. And if someone finds a great deal or an opportunity or a course or whatever it is, that this is a way to easily share it with others and to build on each other's successes and work together, even if it's only virtually. So that brings us to the substantive part of our conversation today, which is really introducing the principles of regenerative growing, and then beginning to look at how we could apply them technically as we prepare our growing spaces for the spring season. So right off the top, I do want to introduce at a high level what this idea of regeneration means. Something that we're hearing more of. It's becoming a bit of a catchphrase, but it's not necessarily intrinsically understood what we mean by that. And so what it means to grow in a regenerative fashion really comes down to this idea that in doing that growing and interacting with the environment or the ecosystem in a purposeful way, we are in fact improving the quality, the health, and the production capabilities of that ecosystem season after season after season. So another way to describe it is regenerative growing is a type of positive feedback cycle where the effort that we put in to grow our plants one particular season then pays off the seasons following, because the quality of the soil has improved, whether it's the structure, the diversity of microbial life, the amount of organic carbon that's available, the mineral content, the other plants that are growing in that ecosystem that are working in tandem. There's lots of different ways that the work we do with the soil and with our plants can ultimately improve the overall ecosystem that we're working with. In contrast, it is important to appreciate that chemical or conventional growing or agriculture is the opposite. So what we know now, which we unfortunately was not clear when chemical agriculture became adopted in the 60s and 70s, they call that the Green Revolution, which I think is the biggest, probably the first and most serious offense of greenwashing of all time, because really it should have been called the Brown Revolution, in that the direction was such that the chemicals that had been made for warfare during World War II to kill the enemy, these toxic chemicals were then redirected after the Second World War to our agricultural crops. And at the time, it was thought that because the crops grew quickly and they grew big, that they were in fact having a positive effect. And it's only been in the last few decades that we've come to really appreciate that what's actually happening with those chemicals is we're essentially force feeding our plants a very select few, three in fact, your N, your P, and your K, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium, that those are the only nutrients your plants receive. They're in a soluble format, which essentially forces it down their throat, so to speak, and then it's washed away at the first rain, which then requires whoever's growing to apply more of these chemicals. The big problems being that just like you and I, plants need a whole variety of micro and macro nutrients. There's dozens of them, not only the three that these chemical companies have encouraged us to think are the only important ones. And that, of course, these chemicals are also toxic. They're killer, and they kill the biology in the soil, which is ultimately what's responsible for feeding the plant. And then it also ultimately leaves residues on the plants that kill us. So the way I describe that is that using a chemical fertilizer like a Miracle-Gro product is the same as going to the all-you-can-eat buffet every day. Certainly, if I did that, I would grow as well, but it wouldn't be healthy growth. And unfortunately, that is what toxic chemicals do. So we're going to get to those regenerative growing principles you see there, but first I want to quickly touch on the soil food web in case any of you haven't seen it. And there's lots more info at thesoilfoodweb.com. Dr. Elaine Ingham is the godmother, the grandmother of soil microbiology. She was the first one to be looking through a microscope back in the late 70s, early 80s. And she was the first one to effectively demonstrate that there was a whole lot of activity going on down there that we really had no concept of. I've heard someone say that we know more about outer space than we do about what's going on in our soil. And so this soil food web is able to describe at a high level why we need a diversity of microbiology. And what I want you to take away from this is one key thing, and that is that in soil, there is no shortage of minerals. There's no shortage of the nutrients that plants need to grow big, healthy, thrive, and produce high yields. No soil anywhere in the world is short on nutrients. What they are short on is the biology that has to work with the plant to allow the plant to access those nutrients. So there is, in fact, two types of microorganisms that are required. And the first is your primary decomposers. So the example would be that in a grain of sand, there is a calcium molecule locked up, a calcium nutrient mineral, and it's in inorganic, in a soluble format. And a primary decomposer, such as a bacteria, is able to disconnect that calcium from the rest of the sand molecule or mineral through enzymes, through the action of the enzymes that it releases. And it, in fact, eats or absorbs that calcium. That particular bacteria is always focused on calcium. It's tailor-made to access that calcium through the action of its enzymes. What happens before that calcium can be delivered to the plant and used by the plant is that we need a group of secondary decomposers. So these are generally larger microbiology, things like amoebas or protozoa. And these organisms, they will eat up to 10,000 bacteria or 10,000 primary decomposers each day. These are hungry guys. So, and in doing so, you can imagine that if they ate 10,000 of those bacteria that had absorbed the calcium, that amoeba is going to have 10,000 units of calcium within itself, which in fact is a toxic level of calcium. And so what happens instead is that amoeba immediately excretes the calcium into the surrounding soil, and it excretes it in a bioavailable format. Another word for that is soluble. So it is, it can dissolve in water. And this is the format that plants require their nutrients to be in order to readily absorb them or bring them into their cell structure and make use of them. So this is a really important piece to truly understand. We know that plants are able to do this ultimately because of photosynthesis. So I'm sure you're familiar with the process of photosynthesis. Of course, we all depend on it because it does produce oxygen by pulling carbon dioxide out of the air along with water using the original solar panels on plants, and ultimately allows the plants to produce glucose, which is a fancy word for sugar, which is also another word for carbohydrate. So I like to point out that the carbon that was in the atmosphere and that was absorbed by the plant is in fact the same carbon that is put into this carbohydrate. And from there, there's two options. Some of that carbohydrate is used to sustain the plant's growth, bigger leaves or taller stem or fruit. However, half of the carbohydrate or glucose that plant produces is actually transported to the root system and excreted through the roots. It's actually released like liquid carbon into the surrounding soil. And for a long time, scientists could not figure out why plants were doing this. It didn't make any sense because they are going to quite a bit of effort to make the carbohydrate in the first place. What we know now is that because plants depend on the microbiology in soil to be healthy, to access their nutrients, they in fact have this brilliant mechanism. You know, no one is smarter than Mother Nature. She created this beautiful synergistic relationship whereby plants release carbohydrate sugars into the soil, and it's a type of language. It's a type of language that the microbiology can understand, and it allows the plant to put in a specific request for whatever it needs at that particular moment. So plants are pretty smart. They actually know what they're missing or what they need next to continue to be healthy or grow or to fight off a pathogen. But they can't get that by themselves. They have to request it, they have to order it from the microbiology that's in the soil. Those microbes will then go out much further than the roots could ever reach. They'll find the nutrients that have been requested, and then they'll bring them back to the plant, hand them over in exchange for more of that sugar glucose that the microbes love. What ends up happening here is that as the plant grows bigger, it performs more photosynthesis, it creates more sugar glucose, which it then releases into the soil in communication with the microbiology. In turn, all those microbial ecosystems also grow bigger and stronger because they're receiving the nutrients they need from the plant. So what ends up happening again is this idea of a positive feedback cycle. The plant grows bigger and stronger and healthier, the microbes grow bigger and stronger and healthier, and it just becomes a better and a better synergistic relationship. And this isn't just for nutrients, but it's a whole variety of metabolic and important processes that in turn the plants rely on microbes providing. And we, in fact, as humans have come to understand and appreciate and use a little bit of this self. For example, the way we make penicillin is through the use of microbes, and we've essentially copied what plants do, and the ability for microbes to provide protective molecules should a pathogen land on that plant or that plant be in need. Okay, so it was really important to go over that today. It is the foundation of regenerative growing, because ultimately the way that we're able to constantly improve our ecosystem and work with it through growing plants is through working with the microbial life in the soil and truly understanding and maximizing this relationship that plants depend on in order to be healthy and successful, and which ultimately has been established over millions of years as a way to constantly regenerate and improve our planet. So that's really what we're talking about at the end of the day, is that regenerative growing is a way to, we're going to grow healthy plants, and in doing so we're going to grow healthy people, because we're not going to be ingesting those chemical residues, and in fact, when we grow regeneratively, we also grow food that has a higher nutritional content. And again, that is because the plant is able to access every little micronutrient at just the right time when it has the biology in the soil to help it do that. That's in contrast, again, to chemical agriculture, where the plant is effectively handcuffed and can only access those 3 nutrients. And over time, there's simply no biology left in the soil. It's all died. That anything else that it truly needs, and in fact, there's lots of other things, it just can't get. And therefore, the tomato or the apple or whatever it is growing, it simply doesn't have the secondary and tertiary metabolites that it should have to deliver that high nutrient quality. Ultimately, we're talking about things like vitamins. The fruit, the yield doesn't have those vitamins if the biology wasn't there to help the plant grow them. Okay, so let's get down to our principles. So the first principle in regenerative growing is about minimizing soil disturbance. And another way you'll hear this communicated is no-till. Tillage is basically digging in your soil. And what's interesting is it used to be thought that digging in your soil was a good thing. Everyone would rototill their front lawn or turn over their garden bed at the beginning of the season. What we realize now is that any digging or disturbance that we do to our soil is in fact of more damage than benefit. there really is no one, no human, let's say, that is capable of improving the quality of our soil through digging or turning it over. It's only the microbiology that can do that work. And ultimately, when we dig or disturb the soil, we're disturbing that biology, and we're exposing them to environmental conditions that they simply dislike, and consequently they go dormant or they die. So really, this idea of digging is bad and should be minimized. And now this is difficult. This is not an easy task. And often one of the questions I get is, well, what about weeds? You know, how am I supposed to deal with weeds if I can't just sort of rip them out of the soil like I normally do? There's a few options, and personally, my preference is the chop and drop, which is where you simply take your clippers, you snip the weed at just above the soil line. And you can either leave that material on the soil as a cover and a mulch, or you can move it aside as well. But what's nice about that is you're leaving the roots in the ground. Remember that a weed, what's the line? A weed is simply a plant that doesn't know how to grow in a straight line. There's nothing inherently bad about weeds. And in fact, they're good because they help to cover the soil. Weeds are Mother Nature's defense mechanism from bare soil. And so another option for removing weeds, should you not want to do the chop and drop option, is to pull them out at the beginning of the season before they've really well established their root system, so there's minimal damage done to that soil. And additionally, to always to do your weeding after it has rained. The soil will be more forgiving and will allow that weed to be pulled out with less disturbance. So this is a key concept to appreciate from regeneration. The next principle is around maximizing diversity, and we spoke on this last time, and Wally gave us a great example of the ability to look for diverse inputs or amendments to your garden, and he mentioned wood chips and leaves, compost, hay, and I love that example because those are all different types of browns, which you may be familiar if you do any composting. We often talk about browns versus greens. What we mean by that are high carbon materials. So another way to talk about that would be materials that have been dead for a long time, usually are brown. So brown leaves or straw, in fact, it has been dead for a long time. Green materials are high nitrogen materials, and they have not been dead for a long time, and they often remain green. So fresh grass clippings, food waste, which is many different colors, but there is lots of green in there. The reason why diversity is so important in a regenerative landscape is that diversity is what provides resilience. And we see this in all examples of Mother Nature's beautiful systems, where there is no shortage of duplication. And I'm always interested in comparing this to our current worldview, where we try to streamline everything and make it as efficient as possible and reduce redundancy and just on time delivery. And the problem with that is, as we saw over the last couple of years, when you do become lean and reduce diversity or duplication, the potential for an impact or a negative event to have a catastrophic effect is very high. So what Mother Nature does is she is constantly maximizing diversity so that if an adverse event does happen, so for example, let's say a moldy spore, a moldy mildew spore lands on a plant, that plant can in fact fight off that pathogen so long as the particular microbes that are well positioned to do that are lying in dormancy in the soil. And again, we don't need a huge population of them, because the plant can very quickly grow the populations of any microbes that it needs. In about 3 seconds, it can transform carbon dioxide into glucose and feed those microbes. But if that particular type of microbe has long been removed, whether through chemicals or damage, tillage, disturbance, then the plant's out of luck and it's going to succumb. And unfortunately, what could have been beneficial is that plant could have in fact also warned its neighbors and said, listen, there is a moldy mildew spore flying around. There's probably more on the way. You need to build up your defenses now. Maybe it's too late for me, but I'm giving you the heads up. And again, if those microbes are ready and waiting, then the plant will be safe. So there's lots of different ways to incorporate diversity, whether it's inputs, whether it's the different types of plants that we grow. We want to be growing a wide spectrum of plants, annuals, perennials, biennials. We want diversity in terms of height. It really is a core concept to this idea of regeneration. Another core concept is around protecting our soil. So I mentioned earlier that weeds are Mother Nature's defense to bare soil. And that's because in nature, soil is never bare. And environmental factors are quite hard, quite damaging on bare soil. So rain, for example, repeatedly hitting the ground directly will create compaction. Wind, of course, will simply just blow off the top layer of soil and where you have all your good humus and nutrients and microbiome. And so that's why she quickly has weeds move in, really as a protective mechanism. We want to incorporate this principle before she has to do that by always having our soil surfaces covered. And there's different ways to do that. So one of the best way ultimately is to have plants growing, and therefore their leafy structure, when the rain drop hits the leaf, it gently rolls off onto the soil, protecting the soil. Of course, the roots hold that soil in the ground as well. So if and when possible, we always just want to have plants protecting our soil. Often that's not possible, especially in our climate, of course, right? And especially if you're a fan of growing annuals, which I know most of us are. They're those tasty fruit and veg crops for the most part. And so in those cases, we're looking at other options. My first go-to option is always around a natural mulch product. So for example, we sell a wood chip, which is made from recycled arborist wood. It's a mix of hard and soft wood. And that is a really great option, both indoor and outdoor containers. So this applies across the spectrum. No soil anywhere should be bare. And again, that's because bare soil exposes that microbiology to unfriendly environments, which will impact their ability to feed your plant. So wood chips are my personal go-to. However, we don't always want to use the same mulch because we want to diversify. So other options are straw, cardboard, brown leaves. All of these are high carbon materials that can be effective as a mulch covering. Another option is to use a tarp or a piece of plastic. This is sort of a last ditch effort, and I always suggest that it is only for a short period of time. Some regenerative growers actually use tarps, dark colored tarps, as a way to manage weeds. So if you do have a patch of soil that is full of weeds, we don't want to rip them out. But what you can do is put a black tarp down for a hot, sunny week. And that will, in fact, I'm forgetting the name of the technique, but it's something like photo radiation, where you're essentially using the heat from the sun and the black tarp to kill those weeds naturally. And when you remove the tarp, you can plant right into that soil without worrying about the weeds. So these are options that are available, but when you can, you want to go the natural way. I mentioned earlier, I was really impressed with Heather referring to all the perennials that they're growing in their community garden. And the reason I was so impressed does come down to this idea of wanting to maintain living roots in the ground as much as possible. And the best way to do that is, of course, through perennial plants being those that live ongoing. They are not a seasonal plant. They don't die at the end of the season. So perennials, they may, of course, lose their foliage, but their roots remain in the soil, and in turn are continuing to work with the microbes through that process. So based on what we were talking about earlier, perhaps you're also appreciating that by having living roots in the ground, not only are we protecting the soil and holding it in place, but we, in fact, are able to continue to feed the microbiology with those carbohydrates, those sugars that the roots release. And the contrast is that when our soil doesn't have any living roots, there's nothing feeding those microbes. And very quickly, they do have to either go dormant or they just die. So this principle is important for a number of reasons, and not least of which is that without an ongoing supply of these carbohydrates provided by living root systems, the diversity in our soil very quickly winnows, decreases, and ultimately is not capable of continuing to exist. So a lot of regenerative growers use something called cover crops. And on the previous slide here, actually in the bottom there, we do make a cover crop kit for small scale backyard or urban growers, which is not something I've seen anywhere else. It was something that I thought was really important because often cover crops are referred to only in terms of large scale agriculture, but it is a technique that anybody can implement at home. Even indoor plants can make use of this concept. And I know I need to keep moving, but very briefly, there is no one type of cover crop. It's simply an umbrella term for this idea that you're growing a type of plant not to eat, but to in fact improve the quality of the soil. And as a technique, there's a lot of different ways that cover crops are used to address problems in soil through regenerative growing. It's a little bit like the Swiss Army knife of regenerative growing, and which type of crop and when you plant it and when you terminate it, which is the technical term for how you get rid of your cover crop, does depend ultimately on what you're trying to achieve. So I believe we have a future session around cover cropping because there's lots that we can cover there. Cover, get it? Okay. Okay, next, chemicals, no chemicals. So the truth of the matter is that one of the nicest things about regenerative growing is it's very adaptable. It is a general set of principles. It is not a hard and fast, written in stone set of rules. And folks always want to know what the difference is between organic growing and regenerative growing. The main difference is the paperwork. There are other more technical finesse-y type details, especially around this idea of tillage in organic growing tilling your soil is acceptable and in fact often encouraged as a solution for weeds because you can't use chemicals in organic growing. Regenerative growing actually allows for contextual dependent choices on behalf of the grower. And this is really important because it means that wherever you're at or wherever a particular farmer is at, if we want to think about applying this ultimately for all the food we grow, all the plants we grow, it's a little bit like a choose your own adventure in terms of you can decide where you want to start. Now, of course, applying all the principles together is the goal because they do build on one another. But there's also really no reason you can't pick and choose a few to start with. And you're really able to tailor them to your particular scenario. So I always take the perspective that chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, fungicides should not be used because they are going to damage the biology in the soil. And that's ultimately what we're trying to keep intact. However, there is the exception that, and the opportunity, if there is a really difficult weed, there are ways that you can use a chemical pesticide that are very focused. There's strict rules around when and how much. It's basically this idea of being very targeted. You would never do it when it's going to rain because then it would reach out to the surrounding environment. You use as little as possible, as low dose as possible, as early in the season as possible. So at the end of the day, I truly believe that most at-home growers do not need to consider chemicals, but I really value that the regenerative frameworks allows for farmers to have this option, because one of the biggest detriments, or one of the biggest concerns that conventional farmers have when they're approached or asked why they're not transitioning to regenerative, why they're not getting off the chemicals, is really around concerns about their livelihood and their ability to manage difficult weeds. So regenerative principles does allow for contextual dependent decisions. Okay, last principle, and then we'll be able to get to some questions shortly. Regenerative growing incorporates this idea of livestock or animals. And again, we're trying to replicate Mother Nature's ecosystem, and there's lots of different animals. So the classic example is that in a natural ecosystem, you have a bird. It eats some seeds while it's near the pond, getting a drink of water. It then flies a number of kilometers over to a wildflower field where those seeds are then deposited. And that's new diversity that's being brought to that wildflower field. New microbes are going to develop or be able to grow as a result of those new plants. And diversity is constantly being replenished as a result of the animals in the ecosystem. As urban growers, we, and certainly as indoor growers, we don't have as much leeway to bring livestock in as needed. And so the nice thing is the other option is compost. And because compost is ultimately often created from animals themselves. And it's important to appreciate that there's two types of compost. There's your regular compost, the big bag, let's say of horse or sheep manure that you would purchase at Home Depot for a couple dollars. This material is very high in carbon, but it is a sterile product. There is no microbiology in that material, and that is on purpose. The company that has sold it has put it through a high heat process in order to kill any pathogenic microbes that may have been in that material. Of course, that process is non-selective, so all the microbes are killed in that material. It is still useful as a carbon input. So if you can't get your hands on wood chips or well, everyone can get their hands on cardboard these days, but leaves, then, you know, these big bags of horse manure will replenish the carbon in your soil, no problem. However, you do want to also be using a biological amendment or a biological compost that is full of the microbial life. And that's ultimately where a product like my worm manure comes into play, because it's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's about that diversity of microbial life. And when you, just a handful, you're adding to your soil, you're providing a wide spectrum of microorganisms, many of which weren't going to be there previously, whether that was because chemicals have been used or simply because regenerative practices haven't been followed. So what the probiotics for plants is able to do is really bring that microbial diversity back to your soil, so that whatever the plant needs, it has the right partnerships ready and waiting to deliver on that. So I jumped ahead from the homework. I just quickly wanted, for those of you who have to run, because I know it's almost 1, that today's special offer is around, of course, the worm manure that's going to replenish the microbial diversity in your soil. And one 700-gram bag does feed about 25 plants. You only need about a handful per plant, or about 20 square meters. You're going to broadcast apply. And the promo for today, I'm really excited. It was a really good fit for what we talked about, is that if you do order 2 of the 700-gram bags and use the discount code REGEN, you'll get the free 2 kg bag of wood chips. So this is a really great option if you have containers that need to be covered. Not only is it going to provide that mulch, it also acts as a slow input carbon source, and it also is an attractive covering for any of your container plants. So do be sure to take advantage of that discount. It does expire at 11:59 tonight. And you would need to put both those products, both the worm manure 700 grams, into your basket with the REGEN discount code to access that today. Now, homework for those of you who have to run, and then we'll get to the questions, is what are 3 of those regenerative principles that we discussed that you want to implement for your spring garden this year? So again, choose your own adventure. We're just going to keep it manageable. We're going to look at the 3 that you feel are best suited to what you want to do, what space you have, what inputs you have, and we're going to look at how we can start implementing those now so that you have your most successful growing season ever. So make sure you come back next time with your 3 principles. And I was hoping that you would also consider what are 3 different ways you could protect your soil, because protecting our soil is so critical to success. I spoke to it on a couple of different principles, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. And it varies depending on the time of year, what plants you're growing, the space you have. So I would love to know, if you put a little noodling into it, what could be 3 ways you could effectively protect any bare soil that right now could be problematic as we head into the spring growing season. Okay, so I think on that, we're going to switch over to our Q&A period. So in order to do that, I am going to ask Kat to line up any potential questions that we have.
So it doesn't look like there are any questions in the chat. But if anyone has any questions now, feel free to speak up.
Jocelyn, it's Sally.
Hi, Sally.
I have a question around the cover crops, like the peas that you sell. When would you plant that? Because I've raised beds in my garden,
Great question. Thanks, Sally. So oats and peas is a type of cover crop mix that is fairly well established in the regenerative community. So it's a cover crop mix that you see used time and time again, and that's for a few different reasons. The oats are used because they germinate very quickly in about a week's time. So if you're trying to get living roots in the ground, then the oats are going to be able to do that in a very rapid fashion. The peas are used because they are a type of legume plant, and they have this special ability. Some of you, I'm sure, understand or appreciate this, where they're able to work with particular microorganisms in the soil to convert atmospheric nitrogen into soluble nitrogen or nitrate that a plant requires to access that nitrogen. So peas are important because only a select group of vegetables, like your legumes, really have this capability. And what happens with the pea? So the peas have these microorganisms that they work with, that the nodules, they create these white nodules on the roots that transform nitrogen. That nitrogen only really becomes released and returned back to the soil when the peas die or are terminated. So I always thought it was like, oh, the peas are growing, the nitrogen's getting into the soil. Not so much. It's actually that pea has, and the nodules in the root system have a massive amount of nitrogen because of the special capability, but that nitrogen is only released and unlocked into the soil upon death of the pea plant itself. So that is important because when you plant your oats and peas, there's a few things to keep in mind. Oats and peas are a type of cover crop that will be are susceptible to frost kill, which means that in our environment through winter, both the peas and the oats will be terminated, and they will not, or they should not at least, come back in the next spring. So for entry-level growers, we do recommend that the oats and peas living cover crop be used in the fall. So we'd be looking at anywhere from mid-August right through till end of September. Generally, you want at least about 6 weeks until your first frost date to allow that cover crop to do what it needs to do. So it's a great option, for example, if you're pulling out your garlic in the middle of the summer and you want to put your heat lovers there next year, you need living roots in the ground, so an oats and pea cover crop will do the trick. Oats and peas cover crop can be used in the spring as well. So if you do have bare soil for a couple of months, let's say before you transplant your tomatoes, you can plant a cover crop of oats and peas when we get above the germination threshold, which, late March, early April, depending. The downside of doing that is that the crop will not self-terminate. So the grower has to, terrible word, has to terminate the crop actively. And there's a few different ways to do this. So the easiest way for a home grower is dependent on how big their space is. So if you've just got containers or raised beds, you may be able to use snippers to cut and chop and drop is the technical term for that technique. The other option, if you have a bit more scale or tools at your disposal, would be a whipper snipper. So that's what we use. It's definitely faster than clipping. But again, you're really just hedging, chopping and dropping both those oats and peas right at the soil line. A third way actually is what I referenced earlier around, I wish I could remember the name. Maybe Kat, you can look it up for me. This idea of photo termination through solar heat energy. So the concept here would be that you use a black or dark tarp, plastic tarp, that essentially is going to smother out that crop. But it has to be fairly hot and sunny out to achieve that. So it's really only suitable when we can count on that kind of a weather. But it's easy. It is relatively straightforward. So does that speak to your question, Sally?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody have any other questions? We're just after 1 here, so I know peeps are dropping off, and
There's a
probably have
question in the
to-
chat
Okay, is that Sharon's
from
question?
Sharon. Yes.
Okay. Question, I have many large garden pots that are usually filled with annuals. Was told that I should replace the soil each year. Were you told that by a garden center that has something to gain from selling you fresh soil? So this is absolutely not true. In fact, I would strongly recommend you don't replace your soil every year. Not only is it going to be incredibly costly, but chances are you're not going to have the quality of soil you want, because you're going to be disturbing it year after year after year. And really, it's only undisturbed soil full of microbial diversity that is of the highest quality. So what I always suggest in these cases is that you want to, you can kickstart the ecosystem of dead dirt or old soil through the worm manure. And that's really a great option for this product, because again, it doesn't take a lot. And what you would do, or what I would do at least, is simply use a handful of the worm manure when you transplant your annuals into that soil. So again, to be clear, we do not want to take our bag of worm manure and dump out our old soil and mix it all together and then put it back into the container, because we have just jostled up all that microbiology, all that fungal hyphae that's built the structure and the porosity is basically going to go out the window by doing that. So instead, all we have to do is when we gently disturb the soil to plant our annuals, we're going to put a handful of the worm manure in the hole first. That way, that microbiology is going to be ready and waiting for those root systems, for that seedling. They can start working together immediately. Worm manure reduces transplant shock so that the plant can get down to the business of growing faster. And then you could also top dress the soil. So that's another way to use the worm manure. If you're not transplanting, you can simply sprinkle it on top of a container and then water well. So again, we're not digging it in, we're not disturbing the soil. We're actually using the watering, which both rehydrates the microbes, which are in a dormant state, to be shelf stable, and then also allows those microbes to quickly be transported down to the root system where they can do their job. Definitely the wood chips on top are great, because that is going to further allow that microbial life to habit all that soil, rather than if the top layer was left exposed. You're going to not have any microbial life at that top, and in fact, then you're going to your soil is going to dry out faster, which is going to lead to dormant microbes, and kind of becomes a chain reaction there. So worm manure, super easy to use, super effective, and I always say, you know, it's if you're a lazy grower or gardener, then it's the perfect solution. Okay, so a few, solarization. I knew it had a cool word. That's why I was like, gotta look that up. Okay, so this idea of putting your black tarp down to kill weeds or terminate your cover crop is in fact called Solarization, I got to remember that. And so question here, do wood chips deplete nitrogen in the soil? Okay, thank you, Sally. This is true in the sense that because wood chips are very high in carbon, excuse me, what ends up happening if we dig wood chips into our soil or put wood chips down first and then put soil on top is that the microbes that are responsible for breaking down that carbon will actually suck nitrogen away from the surrounding soil and even from the plant in order to break down that carbon, because nitrogen becomes a limiting factor. And so those microbes, their appetite for carbon is pretty big, and so they focus on those wood chips, consequently depleting nitrogen from the soil and from the plants as well. This is different than from when we use wood chips on top of the soil as a mulch, because then they're not, intermixed, intertwined with the soil, with that soil microbiology. And so at the interface of the soil and the mulch, there'll be a little bit of degradation, a little bit of reduction in nitrogen levels, but that'll be more than made up for through the rest of the soil. So the concept, what you speak of, is in fact can be a concern, but it's easily avoided so long as your wood chips or any real high carbon material is on top of your soil, not mixed in or underneath. All right, so I think on that note, we'll wrap her up for today. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. Let us know if you have questions. You can email me or Kat. And don't forget to take advantage of the discount offer if you want to try using some wood chips as a mulch on the soil along with the worm manure. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Have fun.